a dark night precedes the ego death and is increasingly harder as it progresses by the impending ego death. Often, the dark night does stop people from merry meet. My name's Carly, and Awaken Power is a passion project of mine. In this video, I will explain how the energy that I'm drawing inspiration from aligns with the challenges and opportunities of a spiritual emergency. We'll delve into the role of shadow work and a letting go of the old self and transmuting the fear of change. We'll also discuss how generational trauma and karma can play a role in our emotional struggles, but also how things can be used to draw inspiration from to empower us to heal these old patterns so we can move into a new paradigm. So if you're feeling lost in the darkness, I want you to know by the end of this video, you can embrace these potent energies, however heavy they can feel right now, as a guide for introspection and transformation. So together, let's delve into these shadows and discover the light that awaits you on the other side. Before we get into the video, I would love to know if you have experienced or started experiencing a spiritual awakening anytime between right now to the last 4 to 6 years. And if so, you're in this wave of the Great Awakening, which is particularly dark and intense compared to previous waves of mass awakenings. In the past, awakenings have been pretty much at the same level of severity, but were drawn out over a bigger period of time, so they didn't seem as intense to give the system and all levels of that, including spirit, energy, and physical levels, and everything in between, time to adjust to the shifting energies, to update the DNA, and to integrate all of the changes. And this was stretched out so much so that a lot of people in the past who have in fact experienced their own spiritual awakenings may have just mistaken that for general ups and downs of life and probably felt like they've been dealt a bit of a crappier hand. This new wave of spiritual awakenings has been intense, and I've been amongst them. I have a background of being in the occult world for nearly 30 years, but starting my own spiritual journey consciously changed everything, and my own spiritual awakening happened without me consciously deciding to take that path. And what I learned after the fact was there is a really fun and not so talked about phase that could be called something like the I didn't know it was happening pre-conscious awakening phase. This video is going to look at the connections between the dark night and our inner darkness, because right now there is a drastic increase in people experiencing the grips of their inner darkness, and that is timely, but none of the justifications for that I will give take away from the fact that it's crap. It's a really hard, dark place, and I'm talking about this from experience. I will never pretend that the path of conscious spiritual development is all love and light. I have a bit of a thing about the love and lighters. Though they serve a place, there is a whole other bag of avoidance and bypassing that we'll look at later. That's not important to this video. What is important, and specifically why I wanted to film this video, is to try and connect with people experiencing this inner darkness and help them to understand where it's coming from, so they may be able to move through this period of their own development journey. I'm seeing a very specific theme playing out in the collective right now, and that is in line with this whole Great Awakening, being that many people are starting to experience symptoms of their own personal and spiritual awakening journeys, whether conscious of it or not, and unfortunately quite often not, which means they take this particular topic even a little bit more personal because they do not understand what is happening from an outside perspective or what is unlocking within. I think it's really important first to clear up a few key terms associated with this path that people might get a little bit confused with. A dark night and an ego death are two separate things, and normally a dark night precedes the ego death and is made increasingly harder as it progresses by the impending ego death, which we'll get into. These two things work hand in hand, and you can't have one without the other. Now, the term ego is extremely misunderstood, and if you say ego to most people, they're instantly going to get their back up. We have been programmed to believe that ego is a bad word. So personally, when I'm working with people regarding these topics, I like to have a little bit of a language change. So the ego in ego death that I'm talking about, I like to call the false self, because there's different versions of the ego and different roles of the ego, like the super ego, and then your own personal ego or mask that you use to navigate your role in this human existence. And depending on what healing modality, psychological teachings, philosophies, esoteric beliefs that you approach this from, they can all have a little bit of a different take on these terms. So this is my take, and this is how I've seen it play out in myself and in other people around me. It just hasn't got as smooth of a ring to it if we say the false self-death. So your ego is basically the mask that you use to navigate the human existence in the role that you're in, like myself, Carly, sister, daughter, spiritual coach, witch, crazy plant lady. These are all different masks that I put on to navigate this experience. You could probably list about a dozen yourself now if you stopped and thought about it. Contrary to popular belief, it's still essential for you to have some form of ego even after an ego death to continue to navigate as a member of society. You just no longer have to be identified with your ego. It becomes the mask that you can put on when you choose to go into the outside world or choose to have an interaction, and you can just as easy take it off and continue your existence because you know you aren't that. But the main false self that you identify strongly with, your nationality, gender, your name, everything that's firmly set in concrete for you that you know as yourself, needs to be absolutely shattered, destroyed, set on fire for you to be able to consciously choose what mask you're going to put on and take off again. You need to break that mold first before you can play dress up. But most people do not get to that stage, specifically because of what it means to actually have an ego death. Now, the dark night of the soul doesn't have a sugar-coated, fun-sounding name very intentionally. It's not a pretty place to be at. It is devastating. Everything you know is turned upside down. You feel spiritually disconnected, at a loss. You don't know the point of anything anymore. You question your whole reality so far, and there are many different phases of a dark night. In fact, there are many different phases of the awakening journey that can even stop you before you get to the dark night. So that's another phase of spiritual awakenings that could be called the I didn't know it was happening pre-conscious awakening stage of the spiritual journey. So it's only once we start going through our awakenings enough that we become conscious of the process that's happening normally can we then look back through our lives and see where it's been trying to happen at multiple times. But we do have free will. So yes, it is said that all of the major decisions in our life have been laid out before us by us, knowing the lessons that we want our soul to take in this incarnation to progress us spiritually, because our higher self knows the end goal. The human incarnation forgets that. That's part of the agreement of coming here and the veil of forgetfulness. But taking this awakening journey is often when you get to look back and start to piece together the signs that have been there pretty much all along. And that's still something that a number of years on can surprise me. Every now and then, something will come into my conscious awareness, another little piece will drop where I can see the reason for a certain encounter or situation or person in my past and how that connects to something that I have been through or remembered. But another part of that awakening journey is the one that often gets people stuck, and it's not so fun. When I was going through it myself, I didn't even know the name of it. As a society and as a culture, we generally don't know a lot about this. This is changing. More people than ever are interested in different spiritualities, self-help and alternative healing practices, where they're getting exposed to these concepts. And that's beautiful. It's also divine timing. More and more people will become aware of this, even within our lifetimes. It will be very hard to encounter somebody who isn't aware of spiritual awakenings. It will be impossible to meet somebody who doesn't know of this process, because that is part of our evolutionary journey and the big split that is happening at the moment. So if you're watching videos like this, then you're likely amongst the people who are actively working on their healing and development and shifting their own paradigms so they align with the higher vibrational and rising consciousness that is available to us right now. But it isn't all love and light, and it isn't an easy path, or absolutely everybody would have already taken it and been well aware of this process. It is called the dark night of the soul for a reason, a very good one. Unfortunately, it earns its name and is a necessary part of the process. Surely we can all relate to these feelings. If you have ever felt lost, disconnected, or plagued with depression, anxiety, or even suicidal thoughts and unexplained illnesses, often life-threatening or severe enough to become chronic and considered a disability and stop you from participating in most aspects of your life, then chances are you have well started your spiritual awakening. You may not have been conscious of it, but all physical manifestations are in fact a spiritual symptom, and it's often these severe symptoms that can actually fall under the category of a spiritual emergency. And that is particularly why I wanted to do this video tonight, because I am seeing instances of this increasing on the daily, and these experiences can be scary, devastating, and lead to you seeing no point in even being here. But this too is a divinely guided call to action. Though shrouded in darkness, these are internal mirrors and symptoms of the dark night of the soul, particularly because of an impending ego death. There are many aspects of the dark night, but essentially it is a necessary breakdown before a powerful breakthrough. The ego itself is best treated as a separate entity for this sort of work to understand better how it reacts and can affect this process. The dark night and ego death are separate, though they work hand in hand. Generally, the dark night comes first and can stop an ego death from actually happening. That is a self-preservation feature of the ego or false self. Essentially, when there is an impending ego death, like is often the case if there is an impending physical death, there is a sense of freaking out, of wanting to delay the inevitable, of resistance, fear, and loss. The ego is kind of like a virus. It wants you to survive because it survives, but for it to survive, the last thing it wants you to do is go on a spiritual journey, because that means you're going to kill the ego. That is the inevitable choice point of this path. Those who don't make it past an ego death, if they are still physically incarnated and haven't succumbed to the darkness that it often brings, then a lot of the times they will self-actualize an illness or series of really tragic events to keep them trapped in this lower vibrational state, like the ego wants, so that you're too distracted with all that and don't dare look within. It will happily send you on any misinformation campaign it can to distract you from your soul's mission, which first and foremost is to remember who you are so that you can awaken and allow the divine gifts and reason why you're actually here, which, if you've experienced this or are experiencing this right now, or have experienced this anytime within the last 4 to 6 years especially, then you specifically are here to help with the global ascension that we are currently collectively going through. The spiritual awakenings are sacred. They aren't a buzz term. They aren't a fad. They aren't a way to bring followers. They are serious. And to even dabble with this idea, you invite this process to speed up. So if you aren't doing it for the right reason, or your heart isn't fully into it, do not look at these topics, because it will happen. And when the dark night starts to unfold, it won't be pretty, because that is when all of the internal darkness comes to light, where the junk has to be set on fire and burned up to allow something new to come in. I will look deeper at the many processes or phases of the spiritual awakening journey later. But what I'm seeing people struggling with the most right now is with this fear that the ego likes to throw out there to stop you even going on your own awakening journey. So I'm seeing this a lot with people who have logically become aware of this process of spirituality, of occult, and have started researching and learning about different aspects of it, which is great. But it also gives the ego ammo. And right when it's trying to stop its impending death, it is going to use whatever ammo it can to hold you up, to gain itself just a little bit more time. Because if you dare turn within, it knows it's done. So right now, I've seen people that have consciously started this journey, meditating, having an interest in the occult, starting to form somewhat of a new identity around that. And that's where the ego gets a bit excited, because it can work with that. It is sneaky and it will let you roll with that for a little while. But the further you go on that path, the more it starts to freak out. This is where the system can start having some signal confusions. As the false self tries to start really throwing its weight around, it's going to do what it can to scare you, to make you feel bad, to make you sit in guilt, and also to make you point the finger at everybody else in your life, past experiences and traumas and people that represent negative aspects of your life, to take the attention off you and focus on something else instead of turning within and seeing what really isn't sitting well with you. The ego is all about projection. This will probably sound a little nonsensical to a lot of people, but with trauma, often we don't actually allow ourselves to experience the trauma in the moment. Normally, this is where our shadow self steps in, and our shadow self is our protector. It's doing its job to save us from experiencing the full impact of the trauma at hand. Even though it may feel like we went through that really crappy thing, and many years after the event, we feel like we're still feeling the effects of the memories attached to it, and often the people that were involved or that have come to represent that thing. What actually happens a lot of the time, and this is why the healing process can have complications for a lot of people, because often we didn't actually fully experience the initial trauma. What happened was our parasympathetic nervous system, our firewall, comes up. That is our self-protective mechanism, and it makes that split second choice. Our flight or fight fight response or freeze of what we're actually going to do in the moment. It goes into take immediate action to safeguard the being from experiencing the trauma at hand. That might sound counterintuitive when years on it feels like that initial occurrence was so dramatic to have this lasting impact on you. But where the complications from healing come from is often we didn't fully experience the situation at the time. We experienced it through a filter, and we're reacting to the situation and protecting and safeguarding ourselves to get ourselves out of that position and into a place of safety once again. Because that wasn't fully experienced, we haven't had the chance to work through it completely and dissolve it. We've stored it within, like a video that has loaded 90%. There's still a portion that our system didn't work through, and that's the portion that we meet when we start delving into the spiritual journey and things like shadow work, which is often when we'll find this hidden final percent that we didn't know existed that allows the penny drop moment that fills in a piece so that we can complete that initial trauma, even years on, from this safer space with our updated experiences and coping mechanisms to then resolve it and clear that file that is taking up resources in the background of the working memory, much like processes within a computer system. Basically, you want to put that task to sleep. We want to end that process. And whilst you're listening to this, just take a moment to do a quick check in on yourself that if even whilst listening to this, you have a frown or tension in your scalp, or a tight neck, or you're holding your shoulders up, or you're clenching your teeth. This stored trauma often is always somewhere in the background and apparent in tension manifestations in the body because your parasympathetic nervous system hasn't come back down to a reset. Your firewall is still up, your defenses are still up, and your finely tuned system hasn't been able to complete its reset process. So something we'll dive into in a later video, a very big part of your spiritual awakening is your inner work, your shadow work, your healing, inner child work, so many different terms. But often what I've found before you even get to that, you get flooded with many other things, including different traumas that you weren't even aware of, or depending on what your particular life path is, the certain energy or chakra center that you're either imbalanced or blocked in, or that you are meant to become strong in, it may directly relate to your specific gifts that you bring to this world. Say that your mission is going to be heart-centered and feelings and empathy and connecting with other people. You're likely going to have traumas that come up. Perhaps previous relationships come back into your mind. I'm not just talking about romantic, they could be friendships, any other connections where you've had some level of wounding or betrayal, and you're able to see those situations play out, but from a different perspective, as in how the other person involved may have been hurting at that time. And you could have spent all this time thinking you were the one that was hurt and experienced abuse, physical or mental, emotional abuse from that person, but didn't see at the same time that perhaps you'd done something that hurt that person. And that isn't to give justification to anybody that is violating your rights, abusing a position of power or trust, or abusing you. I will never condone those behaviors. The point I was making with that particular example was if you're doing something that is meant to be more heart-centered, then often I have found that during the awakening, you will be presented with seeing things from other people's points of view that are not what they thought at the time, but how they were feeling. And you're likely to feel that deeply. You're likely to feel that other person's hurt. You might also have things come up in that process that have something to do with previous incarnations or even generational traumas and karma that needs to be healed that don't really make sense to you at the time but need to be cleared in that moment. And that's why they've come up. These can all feel overwhelming, devastating, and a lot to go through. Often, awakening is even spurred on by a lot of darkness, and that could be externally. It's often with major loss, the loss of somebody really close to you, death, grieving, a long-term relationship, anything that represents a total uprooting of what you've come to know as life, enough to be foundation shattering and make you question the whole point of anything and your very existence. You get the theme I'm going with here, are normally catalysts to instigating your spiritual journey, because it puts you in a state where you're open enough to question the very purpose of your existence, the nature of your being, and therefore are opened to profound experiences that do not come without darkness. They do not come without pressure. And things like spiritual awakenings will happen to everybody when the time is right. We all get presented with that chance, but almost all of us, myself included, because of free will, are able to put a stopper on that. And it's only when we get to that I didn't realize what was happening stage of awakening that we can look back and see where those points were. That process was trying to instigate, and we were presented with our own personal choice points where we could have gone down a profound path but got closer, went this way instead. Normally, then the process will back off a little bit, and then something even more devastating is going to happen because that didn't shake you up enough to crack through to you. So the next thing has to come through. So if you then made it through all of that crap and consciously become aware that you've started your awakening, which starts to make sense of some of the experiences and symptoms you've been having, this is actually when, unfortunately, it's normally going to get a lot worse, especially with anybody experiencing an awakening right now, because of the way that the energies have changed and the really critical point we're at, where we're basically on a time limit for people going through these awakenings because of the shifts that are happening. Essentially, it's like a running out of time for people to at least start this process and align themselves with the path of ascension, because there's a lot happening in the background where we are collectively at a crossroads of which way we want to progress. There's many reasons for this dramatic increase in the severity of these symptoms, speeding up so dramatically due to a bit of a timeline that we're on right now, and the importance of this wave of awakening being ready for the next lot of changes and wave of awakened beings. We're like the support system.